For my research presentation, I sort of started with the myth that that has sort of gained popularity, especially in the tactical and shooting community, that an American marksman named Timothy Murphy fired the shot that won the war at Saratoga when he killed Brigadier Simon Fraser, and that after that shot single-handedly won the battle, the French entered the war on the side of the Americans, and with French military assistance, the Americans were able to win the war. And so my research questions were, what was the actual involvement of the American marksmen under Colonel Daniel Morgan in the battle? What was their role? How consequential were they to the American victory at the battle? And can I establish that the shot was taken by Timothy Murphy? But if not, what was the overall role of the marksman in the battle? And then to also ask, well, after they won the battle, what was the change that was affected in the French policy to the Americans? And it's commonly accepted the French did militarily ally with the Americans in February of '78, so 4 months after the battle. Sort of end on a note of the very general, the French involvement in, say, Yorktown or in the overall war effort. And so I had to research sort of the opposing arguments for everything as well before I could come to my conclusions for the overall paper. And that's where I sort of found the thing that was most fascinating to me, and maybe that I didn't realize so much before. I'd always known that Ben Franklin had been assigned to attempt to get European alliances. I'd read before that he'd spent the war in Paris, France. I didn't realize how much political intrigue the Americans were engaging in terms of their foreign policy, though, until I read the opposing argument that Saratoga really didn't have much standing in terms of the overall war effort, because in 1775 and fully completed by 1776, the Americans had a national identity with a very distinct foreign policy, which included, instead of rejecting, it included a balanced power doctrine, sort of primitively, that would much later morph into what was called triangle diplomacy in the Nixon years, so much later, and that the American diplomacy had sort of an escalation to it. Of course, the problem with this argument is that it rejects French action, but nevertheless, he based it upon the level of intrigue that was going on in France all around the American diplomats. In reading that evidence, I was just struck by it. Never realized how much was going on around the Americans in France. 29th of July, 1776, Barbeau de Bourg had written to the Comte de Vergennes that guns that were no longer needed by De la Tourlière and Pinay might be sold to Silas Deane, who'd requested 10,000 guns for the American war effort, and cannon if you got them. It was 1776. And then by 1777, Lord Stormont in Britain, his secretary Thomas Jeanes was writing to Lieutenant Colonel Edward Smith in the British government that he'd had a conversation with the American diplomat William Carmichael, in which Carmichael relayed that they weren't interested in any British proposals of reconciliation, because they were more sure of French help than they were of the British treatment after an end to the hostilities, regardless of how that end was achieved. And even simultaneously, as he said they weren't listening to British offers, he said, you might want to make that next offer real quick, because the next campaign might be too late. And meanwhile, Dr. B, Dr. Bancroft, addressed as Dr. B, was receiving letters from one Mr. W, Paul Wentworth, a British agent in France, relaying the list of officers sailing with the Marquis de Lafayette to South Carolina in April 77, along with a March 1777 tobacco contract signed between the French and the Americans with Silas Deane's and Benjamin Franklin's signatures. Now they're making big economic deals, so more escalation. And all that said, like all the political intrigue aside, the weakness, of course, with this argument is that it completely rejects French action and how the British would react to it, which the British write about how important it is not to have French action. William Eden had attached some thoughts on what was going on in terms of foreign diplomacy to a letter from Lord North. Well, he sent it to Lord North, and Lord North attached it to his 28th of October 1777 instructions to be transmitted to General William Howe. This was before they knew about the results of Saratoga, but William Eden's sort of formulation was talking about the Americans' threefold mission diplomatically, and point number one, which he said they'd been unsuccessful in so far, was getting France and Spain to enter the war, and he directly stated that the sole purpose of this was to overtax the British war effort, the idea being that the war would become too difficult and too expensive for the British to wage if they had to fight both France, a European power, and their backwater colony. And then he said that second prong, recognition of independence by European powers. He said they hadn't been successful in that, and he did recognize, as the previous letters I've mentioned did, that the Americans had been quite successful in getting supply, trade, armament. But that said, like I said, the thing I was shocked by was just the level of political intrigue. I mean, these European nations have been around at this point in the 1700s for more than 1,000 years, and here come the Americans. Oh yeah, we're just starting a new country. We're gonna shake things up all around here.